Thank you. Thank you. Professor Howell, thank you for that gracious introduction and for your presence here today. Dean Cohen, thank you for the hospitality and for opening up this incredibly prestigious and important institution to this gathering. I really appreciate it. And I'm very grateful to have the honor to be here at the University of Chicago. This, of course, is a home to some of the best free market thinking in the country. We have a country now that needs significant and dramatic economic growth, and the solutions and ideas and principles that have been debated and discussed in this important institution over many generations, I think, form the core of the direction that we need to move forward for this country. But I want to start my remarks this morning by just asking you, how are you enjoying your recovery summer? Now, that's what the president said we were having, but that was last year, the recovery summer. Now gas is $4 a gallon. Home prices are in the gutter. Our health care system, thanks to Obamacare, is more expensive and less efficient. Unemployment's back over 9%. Our national debt has skyrocketed. Our budget deficit has grown worse. And the jobs and manufacturing reports are grim. Now, if that was recovery, then our president needs to enter economic rehab. And the American people need to stop his policies cold turkey. The addiction to spending has to be brought to a halt, and we must have a president who has a growth agenda. With pro-growth policies, I will. Now, the president wrongly thought the stimulus, the bailouts, and the takeovers were the solution. He says they worked. They did not. The president is satisfied with a second-rate American economy produced by his third-rate policies. I'm not. I promise to level with the American people, to look them in the eye and tell them the truth. I went to Iowa and said we need to phase out federal ethanol subsidies. I went to Florida and said we need to raise the retirement age for the next generation and means test cost of living adjustments for Social Security for the people who are coming into the workforce. I went to New York City and told Wall Street that the era of bailouts, carve-outs, and handouts had to end. And I'm willing to tell Americans the hard truth, and I believe they're ready to hear it. But the truth about our economy isn't really that hard at all. And the truth is this: markets work, and Barack Obama's central planning doesn't. America's economy is not even growing at 2% today. And that's what all projections say we can expect for the next decade, 2%. I mean, that's anemic. It's unacceptable. And it's not the American way. The recession may have changed our economy, but it didn't change our character. The United States is still home to the most dynamic and entrepreneurial people in the world. They're all around us, ready to innovate, invest, compete, and create new businesses and jobs. That will mean opportunities for everyone. They've been discouraged and weighed down by President Obama's big government and heavy-handed regulations. They deserve a better deal, and I'll give them one. And here it is. Let's start as a nation with a big, positive goal. Let's grow the economy by 5% instead of the anemic 2% currently envisioned. Such a national economic growth target will set our sights on a positive future. It'll inspire the actions needed to reach it. And by the way, the 5% growth target isn't some pie-in-the-sky number. We've done it before, and with the right policies, we can do it again. Between 1983 and 1987, the Reagan recovery grew at 4.9%. And between 1996 and 1999, under President Bill Clinton and a Republican Congress, the economy grew at more than 4.7%. In each of those cases, millions of new jobs were created. Incomes rose and unemployment fell to historic lows. The same can happen again. Growing at 5% a year rather than the current level of 1.8% would net us millions of new jobs, trillions of dollars in new wealth, and it would put us on a path to saving our entitlement programs. It would also balance the budget. Now, how do we do all this? Well, in short, we need to create more economic growth. by creating more economic freedom. We should start by overhauling the tax code. It's currently an anti-growth 9,000-page monstrosity. It's chock full of special deals for special interests. Its main goal seems to be to generate campaign contributions, not jobs. American businesses today pay the second highest tax rates in the world. Now, that's a recipe for failure, not adding jobs and economic growth. We should cut the business tax rate by more than half. I propose reducing the current rate from 35% to 15%. But our policies can't simply be just about cutting rates. They must also be about promoting freedom and free markets. The tax code is littered with special interest handouts, carve-outs, subsidies, and loopholes. They should be eliminated. Such reform would not only help offset short-term revenue loss from the rate cuts, but it would also reduce cronyism, favoritism, and government manipulating markets for political purposes. Business success should depend on winning over customers, not winning over members of Congress. These changes will make American companies immediately more competitive. Investment from around the world will pour into our suddenly inviting market, creating desperately needed jobs and opportunities. But just changing business tax rates isn't enough. That's because we know most job growth will come from small and medium-sized businesses, and they're typically structured as S-corps or LLCs known as pass-through entities, and their owners are taxed under individual tax rates, not the corporate rates. So pro-job and pro-growth tax reform must include individual tax reform as well. Small business owners and hardworking Americans need a better deal too. Small businesses should also have the option of paying at the corporate rate. On the individual rates, though, we need a simpler, fairer, and flatter tax system overall. And I propose just two rates, 10% and 25%. That's it. Under my plan, those who currently pay no income tax would stay at the zero rate. After that, the first $50,000 of income for an individual or $100,000 of income for married couples would be taxed at 10%. Everything above that would be taxed at 25%. That's the whole structure. It would represent a one-third cut in the bottom rate, and it would allow younger, middle, and lower income families to save and build wealth. And it would represent a 28% cut in the top rate, and it would spur investment and job creation. In addition, we should eliminate altogether the capital gains tax, the interest income tax, the dividends tax, and the death tax. Government has no moral or economic basis to claim a second share of the same income. When you deposit $1 in your bank account, every penny forevermore should be yours and your children's, not the federal government's. Now, once we unleash the energy of America's businesses and families and individuals, as we did in the 80s and 90s, a booming job market will reduce demand for government assistance, and rising incomes will increase federal revenues. In the 1980s, revenues to the federal government increased by 99%. In the 1990s, revenues climbed high enough to balance the budget. 5% economic growth over the next 10 years would generate $3.8 trillion in new tax revenues. And with that, we could reduce projected deficits by 40%, all before we made a single budget cut. Now, the next part of my plan deals with the rest of that equation, which is the 60% of the deficit that isn't solved under what I just described. A balanced federal budget shouldn't be a political soundbite. It should be the law of the land. As one of 49 governors operating with a balanced budget requirement, I balanced 4 biennial budgets in my 2 terms as governor of the state of Minnesota. And I know the reason our legislature gave me a balanced budget was because under our Constitution, they had to. We have to face the truth. Congress is addicted to spending, and that's true regardless of which party's been in control. The best way, and possibly the only way to ensure fiscal discipline, is to put Congress in a spending straitjacket. That's why I support a constitutional amendment that not only requires a balanced budget, but also caps federal spending as a percentage of our economy. It should be around the historical average of about 18% of GDP. Only a constitutional amendment has the power to bind future Congresses to keep their promises. It will force decision makers to finally make decisions, and it'll give statutory reforms a chance to succeed. But passing a constitutional amendment is going to take a while. And the crisis that we face is here right now, and it requires immediate action. I have, and I'll continue to outline specific proposals to reduce spending, reform government, and balance the budget. As I've mentioned, I've already begun that process with proposals regarding ethanol, entitlements, government employees, reforming Wall Street, and much more. For example, I've proposed capping and block granting Medicaid to the states entirely. I propose raising the Social Security retirement age for the next generation. And I've also proposed slowing the rate of growth of defense spending. But we can't really trust Congress to do it. There's no historical record that would give us confidence that they will going forward. We can't allow, though, the situation to risk being unresolved. It will take down America's potential growth and our future prosperity. So I propose that Congress grant the President temporary and emergency authority to freeze spending at current levels and impound up to 5% of federal spending until such time as the budget is balanced. If they won't do it, I will. Now, as an example of the effects of this in terms of the budget impacts, if we're able to cut, or the President's able to impound, just 1% of overall federal spending for 6 consecutive years, we would balance the budget by the year 2017. Think about that. Just 1% each year between now and 2017 would balance the budget by 2017. I know government can cut spending because I did it in Minnesota. I cut state spending in real terms for the first time in our state's history. We did it with priority-based budgeting. We did it by setting a record for vetoes. It took a government shutdown and a long government union strike and many other difficult decisions, but we got it done. We didn't close our schools. We didn't empty our prisons. We cut spending where it needed to be cut, and we can do the same thing in Washington. Impounding the money should be a last resort only, to force policymakers to finally do their jobs, to cut what we don't need, to allow us to keep the things we need the most. Now, there's some obvious targets. We can start by what I call the Google test. If you can find a service or a good available on Google or the internet, then the federal government probably doesn't need to be providing that good or service. The post office, the government printing office, Amtrak, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and others were all built for a different time in our country and a different chapter in our economy, when the private sector didn't adequately provide those services, but that's no longer the case. What's more, the same competitive efficiency that revolutionized America's private sector over the last 3 decades should at long last be applied to every corner of the federal bureaucracy as well. It's no longer enough for government to go on a diet. Government needs to hit the gym and hit it hard. One efficiency program, as an example, is called Lean Six Sigma. It already has a proven track record all across this country in the private sector, using performance-based management practices to streamline programs at the CIA and the Pentagon and the military more broadly. And as I can personally attest, we use this in Minnesota and several of our agencies, and it worked. If we applied this approach throughout all federal agencies, we could save up to 20% in many programs. Now, beyond all of this, the real slog of the next administration will be an unrelenting trench battle against the overregulation by our federal government. It's suffocating America's entrepreneurial spirit. Conservatives have long made the federal bureaucracy the butt of jokes. And considering some of the bureaucrats in Washington and what they're actually in charge of doing, like the strength of our shower heads, the vigor of our toilet flushes, or the glow of our reading lamp, you know, it's hard not to laugh. or cry about such things. But the fact is, federal regulations will cost our economy nearly $2 trillion this year alone. It's a hidden tax on every American consumer, built in the price of every good and service in the economy. And make no mistake, the current administration is hunting for far bigger game than just the incandescent light bulb. Under Obamacare's individual employer mandates, America's private health care market is in intensive care, and the prognosis is bad. The Dodd-Frank financial regulation bill called for more than 200 new rules to be written by more than 10 federal agencies, none of them resolving the catastrophic scandal of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They came out untouched in the so-called financial reform bill. Months after the law went on the books, no one knows yet even exactly what the law is or what those regulations are going to require. And the Environmental Protection Agency is now regulating carbon emissions. Now, that was a policy that's been rejected by the Congress, but puts millions of jobs at risk. The country doesn't support it. The Congress doesn't support it. And yet the EPA continues to try to advance that agenda against the wishes of the elected officials in Congress and, of course, the people across the country. If these policies sound as though they were written by people who spent no time outside of government, well, that's about right. President Obama's political appointees have been notorious for their lack of private sector experience. This is unacceptable. It's fundamentally immoral to force working Americans to hold down 2 or 3 real jobs just to afford the whims of the so-called experts who've never really had one. We don't need Obamacare to create one-size-fits-all government-run health care program. We need Washington to allow a personalized, private health care market to flourish and meet the diverse needs of individual patients and their families. We don't need Dodd-Frank to further intertwine Wall Street and Pennsylvania Avenue. We need to privatize Fannie and Freddie and remove the threat that their political slush funds can never again sink our economy. And we don't need unelected officials at the EPA to do what our elected officials in Congress have rejected. We need less EPA monitoring of the economy and more monitoring of the EPA's effects on our freedom and job growth in this country. I'll require sunsetting of all federal regulations unless specifically sustained by a vote of Congress. Under my administration, and they'll come up for review on votes, they'll be sunset and up for review every 3 to 5 years. Under my administration also, the National Labor Relations Boards will never again tell an American company where it can and can't do business. And just as the federal government must break down barriers with our domestic markets, we must break down barriers in our international markets. Congress should ratify immediately the free trade agreements with South Korea and Colombia and complete the agreement with Panama. We should start new bilateral talks with our trading partners, and we should promote aggressively our exports all over the world. President Obama set a goal of doubling exports, yet his policies have really prevented this. Mine will achieve it. And finally, even if we're successful in changing the way Washington taxes and spends and regulates, many of the gains we'd realize could be lost by the continued debasement of the dollar. As a result of the loose money policies of the Fed, a strong dollar undergirds all that we do for economic growth. Inflation and a devalued dollar cruelly undermines life savings and net asset values and the life prospects of every American. If we want to give taxpayers, retirees, investors, consumers, and entrepreneurs a better deal, we have to maintain a strong dollar. No more quantitative easing, no more monetizing debt, no more printing money with reckless abandon. The President and the Congress have an incentive to maximize employment on their own. And a limited government, streamlined tax system, and competitive marketplace will give the economy what it needs to do so. But we need a monetary policy that's focused like a laser on curbing inflation and promoting a strong dollar and maintaining price stability. That should be the role of the Fed and nothing more. Now, America, as you know, is facing grave challenges. And when times get tough, some politicians try to turn the American people against one another. Regrettably, President Obama is a champion practitioner of class warfare. elected with a call for unity and hope. He spent 3 years dividing our nation. He's been fanning the flames of class envy and resentment all across this country to deflect attention from his own failures and the economic hardship they have visited on America. But class warfare is not who we are. I come from a working class background. I didn't grow up with wealth, but I've never resented those who have it. The top 10% of income earners already pay more than 70% of the income taxes in the country. We could jack that up to 80 or 90%, as President Obama would have us do. But that's not the point. While it might make the class warfare crusaders feel better, it wouldn't create a single job in America, and it would destroy many. President Obama has had 3 years to turn things around. And all we have to show for it now is $3.7 trillion more in debt and climbing, nearly 2 million fewer jobs, a Congress that hasn't passed a budget in more than 2 years, a health care takeover that he pretends we can afford, and a fiscal crisis he pretends we can ignore. We've tried it President Obama's way, and it's only made the economy worse. Other countries around the world have tried it President Obama's way, and they've met with ruinous results. Now, we have a choice. Just because we followed Greece into democracy doesn't mean we should follow Greece into bankruptcy. The United States has always chosen its own path, culturally, politically, and economically. For 235 years, we've taken the road less traveled, the road of liberty, the road of self-government and free enterprise. And it's made all the difference. America is in trouble. There's no question about that. But the frustration and apprehension of the moment doesn't define us. Where we are is not who we are. We are the United States of America. We settled the West and we went to the moon. We liberated billions of good people from communism, fascism, and jihadism. We've lit the lamp of freedom for the entire world to see. The strength of our country is our people, not our government. Americans believe our country is exceptional, and they deserve a president who does too. We can fix our economy. Our people are ready to get back to work. We just need to give them the tools to get there and get the government out of the way. Thanks for coming today. I appreciate your time and your attention. Thank you again to the hospitality to the University of Chicago, and may God bless you, and may God continue to bless the United States of America. I'll be happy to take your questions. Thank you.